If he had to pinpoint the exact moment his life took a different turn, Jimmy Lewis wouldn't know how to answer. Sometimes fate reveals itself in ways so subtle we only recognize its power when we look back. For him, it all began with a small, almost imperceptible gesture, half a sandwich shared during recess. Back then, Jimmy wasn't thinking about grand gestures or life-changing moments. He was just an ordinary kid growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in North Carolina. His world revolved around homework, street soccer games, and rushed lunches. But even in that simple routine, he had something rare, a genuine kindness that didn't need to be taught. It was on a cold autumn morning that he first saw her, a girl huddled at the far end of the schoolyard, eyes cast down, her clothes visibly worn and shoes too big for her feet. Her name was Claire Mitchell, and she carried on her small shoulders the weight of a hard life, reflected in her faded backpack and cautious gaze. Most of the other kids simply ignored her. Children are experts at sniffing out differences and often don't know how to handle them. But Jimmy was different. Something about Claire's shy posture touched him in a way he couldn't explain. Without thinking much, he sat down next to her and, almost instinctively, shared the lunch his mother had packed. Claire hesitated for a moment, as if the world had taught her that kindness always came with a price. But hunger outweighed distrust. She accepted the piece of sandwich with a barely perceptible nod and, for the first time in a long while, smiled a small smile, but filled with silent gratitude. What Jimmy didn't know was that this simple gesture would unfold into something much bigger. Their friendship grew quietly, like roots beneath the earth. There were no grand declarations or eternal promises, just the certainty that, in a world full of absences, they had found a safe presence in each other. While Jimmy lived a peaceful family routine, family dinners, Sunday afternoons playing video games, Claire faced a very different reality. Her father had disappeared when she was just 3, and her mother, overwhelmed by 2 jobs, barely managed to keep the household together. Many times, an empty fridge and heavy silence were her only companions. Jimmy never asked about it. Their friendship was built on silent acceptance, the complicity of small talk, and their walks home together. Sometimes, he would bring Claire to his house, where his mother, a woman with an easy smile and a generous heart, welcomed her as if she were another daughter. On those afternoons, Claire experienced for the first time a kind of warmth she didn't know, a full table, a lazy cat curling around her feet, and laughter filling the air like music. But time, that old master of separation, soon imposed its distance. Midway through the school year, Claire stopped showing up. Some said she had moved to Texas, others merely whispered that she had disappeared. The truth, as it often is, was harsher. Her mother had lost her job, and with no other choice, they decided to start over in a different city, far away. Jimmy felt Claire's absence like an echo that wouldn't fade. He continued his solitary walks and street soccer games, but the world seemed a little grayer. He tried writing letters, left messages on old social media accounts, but never got a response. Gradually, as happens with most childhood friendships, the memory of Claire was tucked away in an imaginary box, alongside other memories life insists on burying under new experiences. Years went by. Jimmy grew up, earned a degree in civil engineering, and began building the life he had always dreamed of. But success, as he quickly discovered, came with pressures and challenges not found in textbooks. Working at a large construction company, he found himself juggling tight deadlines, squeezed budgets, and fierce competition. It was in this environment that the crisis began. A communication error when he swore he hadn't made nearly cost him the biggest contract of his career. A crucial meeting was supposedly missed, and now he faced an ultimatum: either close a new deal within 3 days or be fired. Jimmy knew he was being set up, but proving it was another story. With no time and no evidence, his only choice was to try to reverse the situation the hard way with work. And it was in this moment of pressure that fate, that old acquaintance of those who believe in coincidences, decided to step in. Among the list of potential clients, one name caught his attention: Watson Corporation. A mid-sized company that could be the lifeline he desperately needed. And for some reason he couldn't explain, the name Watson felt strangely familiar. When the meeting was scheduled and he entered the conference room in downtown Charlotte, Jimmy wasn't expecting any surprises. But what he saw froze him for a second. At the head of the table, in a position of authority, sat her Claire. Only now, she was no longer the timid girl from the past. Claire Watson, as she was now called, exuded confidence, her gaze steady and her smile subtle. The past and present collided silently in that bright, cold room. Jimmy took a deep breath and tried to compose himself. Life, it seemed, had just thrown its first of many curveballs. The Watson Corp conference room was spacious, with glass walls offering a generous view of the city skyline. The environment was dominated by a professional silence, broken only by the occasional tapping of keyboards or the scratch of pens on notepads. Everything about the room exuded efficiency and discretion. Jimmy sat at the table, adjusting his posture as he discreetly observed the surroundings. Tasteful frames on the walls showcased the city's architectural evolution, a nod to both tradition and progress, values the company clearly upheld. The air conditioning whispered softly, and the subtle scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air. Claire led the meeting with confidence. Her tone was calm yet firm, her questions were direct, strategic, as if she knew the terrain better than anyone. There was no trace of the girl who once cowered in the schoolyard. Now, she was a respected executive, and every movement seemed meticulously calculated to project competence and control. As the other participants presented their reports and proposals, Jimmy watched Claire silently. Her facial features had become more defined, and the once uncertain gaze now radiated conviction. She wore a light gray suit, elegant and understated, reflecting the life she had built far from her difficult childhood. Yet despite the professional appearance, there was something in her eyes, a barely noticeable spark that betrayed the girl he had once known. It was as if, beneath all the layers of success and self-confidence, the Claire who had once smiled shyly over a shared sandwich still existed. Throughout the meeting, it became clear that Claire was not just a bystander. Her interventions steered the course of discussions, and her opinion carried more weight than anyone else's in the room. She asked tough but fair questions, guiding the team with a firmness that demanded silent respect. Meanwhile, Jimmy presented his proposal with the best professional demeanor he could muster. Internally, though, he wrestled with a storm of emotions. Had she recognized him? And if so, did she remember him fondly or just as a forgotten shadow from the past? These questions pounded in his mind, but he remained focused on the stakes: his career's survival. During his presentation, Claire kept a neutral expression, analyzing every detail carefully. There were no smiles, no nods of recognition, only the demeanor of an executive assessing a business deal. Yet Jimmy noticed, in a fleeting instant, the slightest raise of her eyebrows when he introduced himself. It was subtle, almost invisible, but enough to rekindle his hope that she, indeed, remembered him. After the meeting, as everyone began to disperse, Claire remained seated, reviewing some notes. Jimmy, hesitant, approached her. She looked up and, this time, held his gaze a little longer. There was no more doubt she recognized him. "Jimmy Lewis," she said, with a slight smile. "It's been a long time." Her voice was calm but carried an unmistakable note of nostalgia. Jimmy smiled back, feeling some of the tension dissolve. "Yeah, a really long time, Claire." She closed her notebook calmly, like someone finishing an important chapter. Her smile lingered, small but sincere. "Shall we grab a coffee?" she suggested. "I have a feeling we have a lot to catch up on." Jimmy nodded, relieved. The meeting had been a success, but more than that, a bridge was being rebuilt, a bridge he hadn't even realized still existed. The reunion was no mere coincidence. It was the intersection of two stories that, despite distance and time, remained connected by invisible ties. And although neither of them knew exactly what to expect from here on out, one thing was certain: the past they shared was stronger than they could have imagined. The coffee shop where they agreed to meet was discreet, on a quiet street away from the corporate hustle. Exposed brick walls and wooden tables gave the place a welcoming, almost nostalgic atmosphere. Jimmy arrived a few minutes early and chose a table by the window, from where he could watch the slow-moving city. Claire arrived on time, carrying the same confident posture as before, but as she crossed the doorway, she relaxed her shoulders as if shedding the weight of her responsibilities. She smiled at the sight of him and walked to the table without haste, as if, somehow, the time between them had never really passed. "Such a nice place," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "I thought a quieter environment would be nice," Jimmy replied as she picked up the menu. "And less formal." Claire chuckled softly, and Jimmy noticed that the sound, although different, carried echoes of their childhood. They ordered coffee and, for a few minutes, sat in comfortable silence, lost in their own thoughts. It was a silence that didn't need to be filled. When the waiter brought their drinks, Claire rested her elbow on the table and looked at Jimmy more attentively. "You've changed a lot," she said, smiling sideways. "I hope for the better," he joked, trying to ease the tension. She laughed again and shook her head. "You've always had this thing of making people feel comfortable, didn't you?" Jimmy shrugged but didn't deny it. Then Claire shifted her tone, more serious now. "So, Jimmy, what happened? How did you end up in that complicated situation at work?" He sighed, the weight of reality settling back in. "It's complicated." He paused, choosing his words. "Someone at the office decided it was easier to get me out of the way than to compete fairly. They planted false information, and now they're trying to bring me down." Claire listened carefully, without interrupting. Jimmy continued. "Losing that contract with Watson Corp would have been the end of the line for me. And honestly, I have no idea how to prove what happened. All I can do is work hard and try to turn things around." She nodded, as if understanding more than she let on. "And why keep fighting?" she asked, resting her chin on her hand. "Why not just walk away and start fresh somewhere else?" Jimmy gave a half smile. "Because I believe you shouldn't let anyone take away what you built with honesty. It's not just a job. It's everything. I've built since graduating. Since that day. I shared a sandwich with a girl on a schoolyard bench." Claire lowered her eyes for a moment, and her smile softened. "Sometimes, that's exactly what saves us," she said, almost in a whisper. There was another silence, heavier now, carrying something deeper. Claire seemed to weigh whether or not to say what was on her mind. "Jimmy," she began, hesitating. "I know what it's like to feel like everything could fall apart at any moment. And I also know that sometimes, the people who surprise you the most are the ones you least expect." He raised an eyebrow, curious. "I'm not here by accident," she continued. "When I found out you were handling the proposal, I specifically asked to oversee it. I wanted to return the favor." Jimmy stayed silent, absorbing her words. "You don't owe me anything, Claire," he said quietly, sincerely. She smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Maybe I don't. But the truth is, what you did for me back then changed everything. You gave me a glimpse of what was possible." She paused, taking a deep breath. "And I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to do something for someone who believed in me without expecting anything in return, I would." Jimmy felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to say something, but words failed him. Claire continued. "So, if you'll let me, I'd like to help. Not out of obligation, but because you deserve it." Before he could respond, Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "I have to get back to the office." She stood up, leaving a $20 bill on the table to cover the coffee. "But please think about my offer. Jimmy stood too, and for a moment, they stood face to face, like grown-up versions of the children they once were. Claire lightly touched his arm. "It's not weakness to accept help, Jimmy. Sometimes, it's what makes us stronger." With that, she smiled and walked away, leaving him standing there, staring at his now-forgotten cup of coffee, reflecting on what had just happened. The following days were a mix of tension and anticipation. Jimmy worked hard to finalize the proposal for Watson Corp, now with a renewed sense of motivation. He knew Claire had done more than open a door. She had planted a seed of hope that he couldn't afford to ignore. While he fought to prove his worth, another layer of complexity was unfolding. At Jimmy's office, rumors began to swirl. Colleagues whispered about the sudden luck he seemed to have found, and the atmosphere grew increasingly hostile. It wasn't hard to see that someone was determined to see him fail. Jimmy's main rival at the company was Mark Holloway. Ambitious and cold, Mark saw Jimmy's rise as a direct threat to his own ambitions. It was Mark who had quietly planted the false information that got Jimmy into trouble. And now, seeing that things weren't going as planned, Mark was prepared to play even dirtier. Meanwhile, Claire faced her own challenges. Inside Watson Corp, she had climbed the ranks through sheer effort and competence, but she knew the corporate world was ruthless. Her decisions were constantly scrutinized by colleagues who couldn't accept a young woman in a leadership position. Still, she held her ground, knowing that every misstep could be used against her. At the same time, an unexpected subplot emerged. Claire began receiving anonymous messages, harmless at first, but quickly escalating to threatening. Someone knew about her past, about the struggles she had faced growing up, and seemed determined to use that against her. The messages insinuated that she wasn't good enough for the position she held, that everything she had achieved was the result of favors, not merit. Claire didn't mention any of this to Jimmy, not yet. She was determined to face her ghosts alone. But the pressure was mounting, and her meetings with Jimmy, which had started out professional and sporadic, became a kind of refuge. In those discreet coffee shops and relaxed conversations, she found a space where she could simply be Claire, not the relentless executive everyone expected her to be. For Jimmy, those conversations were a relief too. Amid reports, tense meetings, and the constant shadow of sabotage, he found a silent ally in Claire. And little by little, their friendship began to transform into something more. It wasn't sudden, rather, a gradual process of lingering glances, unexpected smiles, accidental touches that seemed to carry more meaning than they should. Even so, both hesitated. Their shared past was strong, but the present brought complications they couldn't ignore. Claire carried the weight of her position, and Jimmy needed to clear his name before he could think about anything beyond professional survival. As the deadline for the proposal approached, Claire received another anonymous message, this time a direct threat. Someone wanted her to back away from Jimmy's project. "If you don't want your past to come to light, think carefully about who you're helping," the message warned. It was a dirty game, but Claire had learned the hard way that the world rarely played fair. And if there was one thing she wasn't willing to do, it was retreat. Not now, not after everything she had endured. Determined, she decided to act. She reached out to a trusted friend in the company's legal department and discreetly started an internal investigation. If someone was trying to blackmail her, she would make sure they paid for it. Meanwhile, unaware of the threats Claire was facing, Jimmy poured his last efforts into the proposal. For him, the project meant more than a contract. It was a chance to prove to himself, and everyone who doubted him, that he was still capable of winning, even when the odds were stacked against him. And deep down, there was something more, the growing certainty that Claire was part of the future he wanted to build. The proposal was submitted on a rainy afternoon, the heavy sky mirroring the weight Jimmy felt on his shoulders. After weeks of tension, sleepless nights, and silent suspicions, everything boiled down to that moment. Claire was there, as promised, receiving the documents with her usual composure, showing no hint of emotion. Jimmy left Watson Corp with the strange feeling that something was about to change. And it was. 2 days later, the turnaround came abruptly. Jimmy was summoned to the CEO's office, a rigid man with gray hair and an impassive gaze. As soon as he walked in, Jimmy realized he wasn't alone. Mark Holloway was already there, leaning back in his chair with his usual smug expression. "Jimmy," the CEO began bluntly, "we've received a serious allegation against you." Jimmy's heart raced. "What kind of allegation?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "Internal documents show you had privileged access to Watson core decisions before the competition. This, along with previous accusations, puts your conduct under serious scrutiny." Jimmy felt the floor drop from beneath his feet. It was a low blow, clearly fabricated. "That's a lie," he said firmly. "Someone is trying to frame me." Mark crossed his arms, a smug smile playing on his lips. "The evidence is strong," the CEO continued. "We'll have to launch a formal investigation. In the meantime, you're suspended and will have no access to company systems." Anger flared, but Jimmy forced himself to stay composed. Arguing would only make things worse. He took a deep breath, nodded, and walked out of the office without looking back. Outside, the hallway felt longer than ever. The walls, once neutral, now seemed to close in around him. Each step echoed like a reminder of how quickly everything could unravel. Jimmy spent the night awake, combing through every detail, every possible loophole to prove his innocence. But it was clear Mark had moved first, and now Jimmy was on the defensive. The next day, Claire called. Her voice, usually steady, was tense. "Jimmy, we need to talk. Now." They met again at the same discreet coffee shop. Claire arrived in a rush, glancing around as if carrying heavy secrets. "I know they're trying to take you down," she said without preamble. "And I think I know who's behind it." Jimmy stared at her, surprised. "Mark Holloway," she said. "During our internal investigation, we found traces of unauthorized access to your documents. And guess what? The IP address matches the one that accessed confidential information from Watson Corporation." He blinked, stunned. "You're sure?" "Positive." Claire pulled a tablet from her bag and showed him a series of reports. "And there's more. The anonymous messages I was receiving? They came from the same IP address. Mark wasn't just trying to sabotage you, he was trying to intimidate me too." Jimmy ran a hand over his face, trying to process it all. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I needed to be sure. And now I am." She took a deep breath. "Jimmy, you have to act fast. If you expose this, you won't just clear your name, you'll make sure he can't do this to anyone else." He nodded, the old instinct to fight sparking back to life. "But how can we prove it?" he asked. Claire smiled, a confident, determined smile. "Leave that to me. I have allies in legal and IT. We'll gather solid evidence. I just need you to stay calm and not react to any provocations." It was risky. Jimmy knew that. But he also knew he didn't have many options. Trusting Claire was his best and maybe only chance. While Claire moved the pieces behind the scenes, Jimmy did what he could to keep his head up. He ignored the disdainful looks at the office, the whispered insinuations in the hallways. He clung to the memory of the boy who, years ago, shared a sandwich without expecting anything in return. That was the Jimmy he needed to be now. The plan was simple: monitor Mark, gather more evidence, and present the dossier directly to the company's board. If it worked, Mark would be exposed, and Jimmy would finally have his redemption. But plans rarely go as expected. The night before the crucial meeting, Jimmy received an anonymous phone call. "If you know what's good for you," said a distorted voice, "you'll drop everything." or you'll lose a lot more than just your job." The line went dead before Jimmy could respond. He stood there, staring at his phone, heart pounding. The threat was clear. And now he faced a difficult choice: back down and save himself, or move forward and fight for what he believed was right even if it cost him everything. The warning echoed in his mind all night. Sleep was impossible. When the alarm rang, he was already dressed, ready to face whatever came. At the office, the atmosphere was heavier than usual. Conversations stopped when he passed by, and he could feel the stares following him. Jimmy walked with firm steps, but his stomach churned. The words from the call haunted him: lose more than just your job. That afternoon, Claire met him at the building's coffee shop, a folder full of documents in hand. She wasted no time handing it over. "Here's the proof," she said, her voice low but steady. "Unauthorized access to your files, data manipulation, and attempted blackmail. We even traced the anonymous emails I received back to Mark's computer." Jimmy quickly flipped through the documents, his heart racing. Everything was there, black and white, irrefutable evidence. "And now?" he asked, still hesitant. Claire looked directly at him. "Now you have to decide. Present this to the board or let it go." He took a deep breath. The decision seemed simple in theory but carried enormous weight in reality. It wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about standing up to someone willing to do anything to defeat him. "I can't let this go," he said at last. "Not after everything." Claire nodded, satisfied. "Then we go all the way." The board meeting was scheduled for the next day. It was a high-level meeting, no place for amateurs. Jimmy knew he would have to be precise and convincing. When he arrived at the conference room, Mark was already there, as smug as ever. He exchanged a sarcastic smile with Jimmy, already celebrating his presumed victory. The chairman opened the session, and Jimmy was called to present his defense. He walked to the center of the room, feeling the weight of all eyes on him. He took a deep breath and began. "I've been accused of misconduct and of gaining unfair advantages. Today, I'm here to prove that these accusations are false." With a firm tone, he presented the dossier Claire's team had prepared. He showed the unauthorized access, the tampered documents, the anonymous emails. Each piece of evidence was a nail in Mark's coffin. As Jimmy spoke, Mark's expression shifted from disbelief to irritation, and finally, to panic. When Jimmy finished, the room was silent. Board members exchanged serious glances and whispered among themselves. The chairman called for a brief recess to deliberate. Mark, who had remained seated until then, stood up and rushed out of the room. Jimmy watched him disappear down the hall but didn't follow. He knew Mark's fate was now in the board's hands and in the undeniable evidence Claire had gathered. Minutes later, the chairman returned and summoned Jimmy. With a grave face, he announced, "After reviewing the evidence, we conclude that the accusations against Jimmy Lewis are unfounded. He is officially cleared of all suspicion. Furthermore, we will initiate a formal investigation against Mark Holloway." The relief was immediate, but Jimmy kept his composure. He thanked the board and left the room with his head held high. Outside, Claire was waiting. When he saw her, a genuine smile spread across his face. "We did it," he said, unable to hide his emotion. Claire smiled back, and for the first time in a long while, Jimmy felt like he could breathe again. "You did it," she corrected. "I just helped open the door. Without you, I never could have done it," he said, serious. They walked side by side toward the elevator, unhurried, as if finally leaving behind a difficult chapter of their lives. But of course, fate still had a few cards left to play. The victory at the board cleared Jimmy's name, but the battle had left scars. For weeks, he had to rebuild his image within the company, regain the trust of colleagues and superiors. It wasn't easy. In the corporate world, victories were quickly forgotten, but scandals, even unjust ones, lingered. Jimmy, however, was different now. The experience had changed him. More than proving his innocence, he had learned to fight for what he believed in even when the path seemed impossible. Claire hadn't come out unscathed either. Exposing Mark and revealing the threat she had faced brought a lot of attention within Watson Corporation. Many admired her courage. Others, of course, took the opportunity to question her competence and diminish her achievements. Still, she remained firm. She had learned long ago that true respect wasn't earned just through results, but through integrity. And that was exactly what she continued to demonstrate every day. Amid all this, Jimmy and Claire grew even closer. The bond they had formed in childhood, strengthened by the adversities of adulthood, evolved into something new. It was a relationship built on mutual respect, on comfortable silences, and on smiles exchanged when words weren't necessary. They started seeing each other outside of work, without the pressure of meetings and contracts. Walks in the park, simple dinners at hidden restaurants around the city, Sunday afternoons where time seemed to slow down. Gradually, casual conversations gave way to deeper confessions. Jimmy opened up about his fears, the fear of failure, of disappointing those who believed in him, of not being enough. Claire, in turn, revealed the invisible scars left by a difficult childhood, the constant feeling of not belonging, of always having to prove her worth. These vulnerabilities didn't drive them apart. On the contrary, they brought them closer. They found in each other a mirror, a confirmation that, despite everything, they had made it and could go even further. One evening, sitting on a park bench at sunset, Jimmy, without much ceremony, took Claire's hand. She didn't pull away. She simply intertwined her fingers with his and rested her head on his shoulder. They didn't need words. It was the kind of understanding that only existed between two people who had shared more than moments. They had shared growth, pain, and resilience. As the city lit up around them, they sat there, motionless, as if time had finally learned to respect their space. At work, things improved as well. Jimmy was promoted, recognized not only for his technical skills but for the courage and resilience he had shown during one of the company's most difficult times. Claire, for her part, took on an even higher position at Watson Corp, leading projects that had a real impact on the local community, a quiet way of giving back for everything she had once lacked. Above all, they understood something fundamental: success wasn't just about what you achieved on paper, but what you built within yourself, the ability to maintain dignity in times of crisis, to trust in what is right even when it means standing alone, to offer kindness without expecting anything in return. That was the real victory. And it was this awareness that guided Jimmy when he decided to take an important step. One spring afternoon, at the same coffee shop where they had reunited, he pulled a small box from his pocket and placed it on the table. Claire raised her eyebrows, surprised, but smiled. "About time," she teased, her tone light but her eyes shining. Jimmy chuckled and opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring, nothing extravagant, exactly how she liked it. "Claire Mitchell," he said, using her childhood name, the name that carried all their history. "Will you keep sharing sandwiches with me? For the rest of our lives?" She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, her smile growing until it turned into a light, joyful laugh. "Of course I will," she said, extending her hand so he could slip the ring on her finger. Around them, life carried on, cars passing by, people laughing, coffee being served. But for them, that moment was everything. The culmination of a story that had begun with a simple gesture and, despite all the obstacles, had endured time, distance, and adversity. A love built not on grand gestures but on small acts, and therefore, unshakable. Life finally seemed to find its balance for Jimmy and Claire. Work routines, quiet weekend outings, and wedding plans fit together like pieces of a puzzle that, after years of attempts, was finally coming together. But peace, as they both knew, was often just the calm before a new storm. Without them knowing, Mark Holloway hadn't given up. After being fired, humiliated, and left without prospects, he disappeared for a few months, not to start over, but to plot his revenge. Meanwhile, Claire dedicated herself to a special project at Watson Corp, building a community center in the neighborhood where she grew up. It was the fulfillment of an old dream to offer children what she had never had: a safe space to learn, play, and dream. Jimmy, proud, supported her every step of the way, contributing however he could. The work was intense but rewarding. The center was nearing completion, and Claire couldn't hide her excitement. She spent hours fine-tuning details, organizing the opening ceremony, and rallying the community around the project. And that's when the first signs that something was wrong began. It started with small incidents: missing documents, undelivered emails, important calls that seemed intercepted. Isolated, they might have gone unnoticed, but together, they indicated that someone was trying to sabotage the project. Claire quickly picked up on it. She called Jimmy for a private conversation. "Something's not right," she said, showing him a stack of inconsistent reports. "It feels like someone's trying to delay the opening." Jimmy studied the papers, his expression darkening. "You think it's him?" he asked. Claire didn't have to ask who. They both knew who he meant. "I have no proof," she replied. "But I know the signature of someone who plays dirty." They decided to act cautiously. Claire tightened digital security, reinforced communication protocols, and involved only trusted people in the project. Even so, the feeling of being watched lingered. A few days before the inauguration, they received an anonymous warning: cancel the event or suffer the consequences. Claire, determined, refused to back down. She had worked too hard to let fear win now. Jimmy, worried, reinforced security at the venue, installing cameras and hiring private guards for the day of the ceremony. The day of the inauguration arrived. The morning was clear, the sky a bright blue, rare for the city. Children ran across the freshly paved courtyard, while adults set up tents and made final adjustments. The community center looked beautiful, colorful, vibrant, full of life. Claire, elegant in a simple dress, moved among the guests, smiling and greeting old neighbors, employees, and journalists. Jimmy watched her from a distance, a mixture of pride and concern in his chest. He knew that despite the apparent calm, danger still lurked. The opening speech began. Claire stepped onto the small stage set up in the courtyard and took the microphone. The crowd fell silent. "This center is not just a building," she began, her voice firm. "It's a symbol of what we can achieve when we believe we are capable of something greater. It proves that it doesn't matter where we come from, only where we choose to go." The audience applauded, and Claire smiled. But in the middle of the crowd, Jimmy noticed something odd. A man wearing a cap and dark glasses was moving discreetly toward the back, carrying something bulky under his coat. Instinct took over. Jimmy bolted toward the stage, cutting through the crowd. Claire, noticing the commotion, hesitated for a moment, looking at Jimmy as he frantically signaled. A nearby security guard reacted quickly too, running to intercept the stranger. It all happened in an instant. The man pulled out a broken bottle, improvised as a weapon, and tried to advance. The security guard tackled him before he could reach the stage, while Jimmy shielded Claire, pulling her behind the makeshift structure. Panic spread among the crowd. Children cried, adults screamed, journalists captured every moment. The attacker was quickly subdued and handcuffed. Meanwhile, Jimmy checked on Claire, who, despite the scare, was unharmed. She looked at him, pale, but with steady eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked, concerned. Claire nodded, taking a deep breath to compose herself. "I'm fine. And you?" He smiled, relieved. "Better now." Despite the attack, Claire decided to continue. She returned to the stage, holding the microphone with steady hands. "No threat will stop us," she said, her voice resonating with strength. "This center will open. And it will stay open." The crowd, initially frightened, responded with thunderous applause that seemed to shake the ground. Watching her, Jimmy knew in that moment she wasn't just the girl he once helped in school. Claire was the woman he wanted by his side, strong, resilient, capable of turning pain into power. The attack at the event caused an immediate uproar. Within hours, local media circulated photos, videos, and sensational headlines. Attempted sabotage at community center inauguration, the sites declared. Some praised Claire's courage, while others simply exploited the panic. Meanwhile, the police interrogated the attacker. It didn't take long for the man, cornered and without options, to confess he had been hired by Mark Holloway. The revelation didn't surprise Jimmy or Claire, but it carried a heavy weight. Mark was no longer just a corporate rival, he was someone willing to destroy reputations and put lives at risk. The case quickly escalated. Watson Corp was notified. The press demanded statements. The board insisted on explanations. Claire was called to an emergency meeting with the company's executives. In the Steel and Glass headquarters, Claire rode the elevator up to the boardroom with firm steps. Jimmy accompanied her to the door but knew this was her battle. She entered alone, leaving him waiting outside, watching the reflection of the clouds on the polished windows. Inside, the tension was palpable. The directors looked at Claire with serious expressions, some concerned, others skeptical. "Ms. Mitchell," the chairman began, "do you have anything to say about the incident?" Claire sat upright in her chair. "I do," she replied, voice steady. "And I have evidence." With surgical precision, she presented everything they had collected: the attacker's confession, the anonymous messages, the pattern of sabotage, all leading back to Mark Holloway. She detailed how he had tried to damage Watson Corp, threaten employees, and jeopardize the company's reputation. When she finished, a heavy silence hung in the air. One of the directors cleared his throat. "Do you realize you should have informed us sooner?" Claire held her ground. "I informed you as soon as I had proof. Acting prematurely could have compromised the investigation." Some directors nodded subtly. Others exchanged glances. The chairman leaned back in his chair. "And the community center? Do you intend to proceed after the incident?" Claire didn't hesitate. "Yes. Now more than ever. If we give in to intimidation, we surrender our principles." Her response was direct, without embellishment. Exactly what they needed to hear. After a long deliberation, the board made its decision. Claire would not only keep her position, but she would also receive full authority to lead the community project, with the company's complete support. Watson Corp would publicly commit to denouncing any attempts at sabotage, a firm stance against threats like Mark's. When Claire left the room, Jimmy was waiting. Seeing her slight smile, he knew they had won another battle. "And?" he asked. "We're in," she answered, relieved. Jimmy smiled a genuine smile, full of pride and admiration. Days later, Mark was formally arrested, charged with conspiracy, attempted assault, and property damage. Justice, finally, was being served. The community center opened its doors as planned. The ceremony was rescheduled this time, without incidents. Children ran through the colorful rooms, exploring new toys and libraries filled with books. Entire families teared up, seeing what had been built for them. Claire gave a brief, emotional speech. She spoke about resilience, about not letting fear dictate our steps, and about how small gestures like sharing a sandwich could truly change lives. Jimmy watched from the crowd, his heart full. Every word she spoke echoed what he had always known, that seeds of kindness, once planted, blossomed in unexpected ways. After the ceremony, amid congratulations and photos, Claire found Jimmy in the garden behind the center. "Can you believe this?" she asked, looking around. Jimmy laughed. "I can. ever since that first sandwich. She stepped closer, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other, as if the world around them had disappeared. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For not giving up. For believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Jimmy gently touched her face. "I only did what any friend would do." She smiled. "You did much more than that." Before he could respond, Claire kissed him a calm, unhurried kiss, full of silent promises. When they pulled apart, Jimmy intertwined his fingers with hers. "Let's go home." She nodded, smiling. "Let's." And so they walked away, leaving behind not just a new building filled with hope but a story of resilience and love, one built to last. Time passed, and the community center became a landmark in the neighborhood. More than just a building, it became a symbol, concrete proof that even the hardest stories could have different endings when courage and kindness were sown. Claire and Jimmy continued to build their lives, now intertwined not only by friendship but by love and mutual respect. Their wedding was small, just like everything between them had always been an intimate celebration with close friends and family, full of genuine smiles and tight hugs. The ceremony took place in the garden of the very community center that had inspired so much of Claire's journey. Surrounded by children and families who had found hope there, they exchanged vows under the open sky, with no doubt that they were exactly where they were meant to be and with the person they were meant to be with. In their careers, Claire took a new path. She founded a nonprofit organization focused on social projects, leveraging her experience and the connections she had built at Watson Corporation. Jimmy, on the other hand, accepted a leadership position at a construction firm that specialized in community and sustainable projects, a reflection of the dreams he had nurtured since childhood. More than titles or positions, what truly mattered to them was the mission they shared to leave the world a little better than they found it. The scars from their past struggles didn't disappear. But together, they formed a tapestry that told the true story of their lives, a story of resilience, triumph, and a love forged not despite hardships, but because of them. One lazy Sunday afternoon, Jimmy sat on their porch, watching Claire play in the garden with some of the center's children. The golden light of sunset framed the scene, and he realized that, despite the challenges or perhaps because of them, they had achieved something rare, a life filled with purpose and genuine affection. He smiled, thinking back to how it all began with a simple gesture during recess at school. A piece of sandwich shared without pretension, but carrying the seed of everything they had built. Maybe that's how the greatest stories begin, quietly, almost imperceptibly, but with an impact that echoes far beyond what their protagonists could imagine. And there, in that silent, perfect moment, Jimmy knew with all the certainty his heart could hold they had won. Years later, on another lazy Sunday afternoon, Jimmy and Claire walked hand in hand down the brightly lit corridor of the community center. On the walls, old photos showed the center's inauguration, smiling faces, children growing up. They stopped in front of a special frame, a photo of the two of them, very young, sitting in the schoolyard, sharing a sandwich. Claire smiled. "Do you think they had any idea where they would end up?" she asked playfully. Jimmy squeezed her hand gently. "I think they did. Somehow, I think they always knew. And together, they moved forward as they always had." Stories like Jimmy and Claire's remind us that small gestures can transform destinies. That kindness, even when sown silently, grows deep and lasting roots. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone you believe needs hope today. And remember, every big change begins with a simple choice to reach out, to share a little of what we have, to believe in someone. Why not start now? Tell us in the comments what small act of kindness changed your life.